This is my cat, Lil Baby. I named her Lil Baby after the rapper. Look at you, aren't you a little baby? Oh, you're a cutie. Anyway, let's talk about ultranationalism some more.
देशभक्ति को नजरअंदाज कर दिया बंगाल भी आज
India is having their general election this year from the 11th of April to the 19th of May. Knowing my pace, I'm sure the election will already be underway by the time this video gets actually completed. And India is the world's largest democracy. It has a population of about 1.3 billion, and it is the 7th largest economy on Earth, according to recent data by the IMF. Seriously, it's below France. I don't know how that's fair. So what happens in these elections will directly affect 1 out of every 7 people, and it will absolutely in some way affect the other 6. So it's important to learn and be educated about the political situation in a country as big and influential as India. And, you know, obviously India is a very large country. It has a lot of diversity in languages. It has very complicated and is often full of warring sort of political interests. Or is it? It is. Part 1. What the fuck is India? India is a subcontinent encompassing hundreds of ethnic groups and languages and about 7 independent countries. It has a very complicated history that goes back to as long as there have been humans to form civilizations. So we're going to ignore all of that and just pretend that 1947 is year 0. So when Salim Sinai was born, the British Raj was dissolved and India was granted independence after a long campaign of struggle. The 2 biggest parties in India fighting for independence were the Indian National Congress and the All India Muslim League. And although they had worked for the same goal of leaving British occupation, the Muslim League did want an independent Muslim state, which would later become the Dominion of Pakistan. Muslims were a minority in the area, and there was a fear that if they were put in with the Hindu population, they could be the victim of discrimination. Not terribly unfounded fear. Gandhi himself was antagonistic towards Muslims a lot in his life, as well as a very large Hindu nationalist movement in the independence struggle. Oh, believe me, we're gonna get there. The leader of the Muslim League was a man named Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and he had hoped that this division would allow for more peace and friendship in the subcontinent. And, yeah, that didn't happen. In context, the quote, "good fences make good neighbors," is the person who says that is the bad guy. Even though India is officially secular, it is a lot like the US and Turkey, where one religion has most of the actual political power. And if you're not a member of that group, then it can be hard to advance in politics. And in India, as you might expect, that religion is Hinduism, which itself is a very diverse religion with not narrowly defined teachings by any one sect. There are a lot of branches that can vary even as much as where you live. But we're not going to go too far into that, and we are going to point out that there is a large Hindu nationalist movement in India that does threaten the secularization of the republic. Part 2. Yay, more cults. So like the video that I did on Japan, right-wing organizations play a big part in the politics of the country, but it is important to mention the different contexts in which Japan and India operate. Japan, for example, is quite homogenous in both language and ethnicity. Been colonized. They always were the colonizers, formed around this one specific definition of what it means to be Japanese. India, on the other hand, was colonized for a long time by a couple different European powers, mostly the British, and it is composed of many different ethnic groups and languages. Most of the languages, India doesn't even have one language family tree. It's very, very diverse. So Indian nationalism is a bit of an oxymoron, considering that what it means to be Indian is not as cleanly defined. But the one thing that does unite most people in India is the general religion of Hinduism. Hinduism, of course, is not like the Abrahamic faiths, where they are general stories that can be understood by people of any culture, which is why colonizers and missionaries are able to spread them effectively. Hinduism, meanwhile, is based on extremely specific locations and cultural aspects of the Indian subcontinent. Many of the tenets and stories will not make sense to someone who doesn't have at least a cursory knowledge of the area. And as a result of that, Hinduism also plays more personally into the lives of people who do live there. Even if you're a devout Christian in the United States, there is still the nagging feeling that people in the Middle East thousands of years ago, did their thing and they totally thought of you in the Americas. No, honestly, they did. They really did. And they believed in you. Hindu nationalism is often referred to as Hindutva, so that's what we're going to be trying to call it from forth. Before Sinai was born, there was a volunteer paramilitary organization named Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, I think I got that right, or RSS. They are a Hindu nationalist organization with the goal of creating a strictly Hindu nation, and by all accounts, they did take inspiration from the fascist parties that were rising in Europe around this time. This organization was obviously banned during the British rule because of their militant activities, even though they never attacked the British directly, which I feel is a good sign of their priorities, just as an aside. After independence, they left the underground and played a role in helping Hindus get to India during the partition. They also contributed to a lot of the violence against Muslims who were fleeing to both Pakistans. They're not good guys terribly much. But because of the helping Hindus thing, they are a bit mythologized by the modern Hindu right into having an integral role in the founding of their country, which they did the barest of possible minimum, and partition didn't need to happen, people. We could have just had one big secular democracy, but no. Part 3. The political parties in India. There are a lot of parties in India, and I do mean a lot. India uses a parliamentary system similar to what the UK has. The upper house is called the Lok Sabha, and the lower house, where most of the policy and governing actually happens, is called the Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha has a lot of political parties in it, but there are two main alliances that encompass parties and general political interests. The National Democratic Alliance is the right-leaning coalition, and the United Progressive Alliance is the left-leaning one. At the core of these alliances, we have the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Indian National Congress, respectively. We're going to start with the latter party first and point out that the INC was one of the biggest organizations in the fight for Indian independence. This is where Mohandas Gandhi got his start. They were officially formed in 1885, which I believe is -62 on our calendar, and being so mythologized into the founding of their country has helped make the INC so electorally successful. Gandhi is still an overwhelmingly popular figure in India, and people with that name constantly hold power in the party. We'll get to that later. The INC exclusively had premiership for the first 30 years of independence from 1947 until 1977, when the Janata Party had unexpectedly won. Now, the Janata Party is a precursor to the BJP, but they were formed initially as a big tent of ideologies. They were opposed to the INC and specifically Indira Gandhi's emergency. In 1975, Indira Gandhi had the President of India, a mostly figurehead title, establish a state of emergency. There are a few reasons why this would happen, but I do want to focus that the politician Raj Narayan had sued Indira Gandhi for election fraud and won, which would have validated her electoral win if not for the emergency coincidentally being declared just at that point after. But I do want to point out that for about 2 years, India was ruled by autocratic authority. Civil rights were heavily restricted. Opponents of the INC were dived underground and arrested without charge. There were mass programs of sterilization to curb population growth, which she had put her son in charge of that. And there was a lot of other things that are just really horrific to get into. But it is just noting that ostensibly a liberal party had turned into a police state practically overnight. It was very troubling to a lot of people in India, and it really hurt their popularity. When the emergency was lifted in 77, elections were a bit pushed back but were held regular, and the Janata Party formed out of all the previously banned parties and political figures. Raj Narayan, for example, was a socialist, and Atal Bihari Vajpayee was a Hindu nationalist. And in 77, Morarji Desai, a former INC member who at one point was Gandhi's Minister of Finance, became the first Prime Minister not from the INC. INC would win again 3 years later in that election, as the Janata Alliance slowly fell apart as members migrated into different parties. Big tents are not sustainable, people. Do not rely on them. And the clearest successor to the BJP from this point is the Bharatiya Janata Party. Again, did start from ex-Janata members, and the Janata Party, what remained of that, had merged into them in 2013. So the BJP party, well, literally Indian People's Party, was formed in 1981 out of Hindu nationalists and former members of the Bharatiya Jana Sangh Party, before they had merged with Janata. Now, the BJP party is, in simplest terms, the right-wing counterpart to the INC, as they're both the two biggest parties. But while the INC are ideologically more social democratic in the vein of Mohandas Gandhi, the BJP is very much a reactionary right-wing party based on Hindutva and nationalist concepts. And it is important to specify as Hindu nationalism as opposed to Indian nationalism. For example, a lot of members of this party insist on only speaking in Hindi, despite the fact that only 57% of Indians speak the language. And not to mention, a little under 80% are actually Hindus. So they are very much excluding a lot of Indians when they become Hindu nationalists. Now, the first BJP Prime Minister won in 1988, the aforementioned Vajpayee. Now, this was an interesting time in the election of India. There was a very high-profile nuclear weapons test, as well as, surprisingly, a renewed call for the easing of tensions with Pakistan. But one thing that helps us understand where we are today is the 2002 Gujarati riots. There's a state in western India called Gujarat, and on February 27, 2002, a train carrying hundreds of Hindu pilgrims were attacked by a mob and the train set on fire. This resulted in the deaths of 59 people. The perpetrators were a series of Islamic fundamentalists that did not appear to be connected with any particular organization that was well known at the time. And in the aftermath of this attack, there was a slew of intercommunal violence between Hindus and Muslims in the state that left over 1,000 people dead, mostly Muslims by far. And many have accused the BJP government of being complicit in the anti-Muslim side of the violence, either by ignoring any method to quell the violence or at some points being an active player. The chief minister of Gujarat at the time was BJP member and current Prime Minister of India, spoiler alert, Narendra Modi. He was widely criticized and accused of telling the police to stand down from protecting Muslims, even when violence was occurring near police stations. There is plenty of evidence that Vajpayee wanted to remove Modi from the post, but his fellow partymen convinced him against it. And he had expressed regrets about not removing Modi after his party lost power in the 2004 elections. Later that year, Vajpayee gave a speech in which he was criticized for saying that Muslims don't like to live in coexistence with others, and the PN's office had claimed the remarks were taken out of context, and yes, in his defense, if you read a few more paragraphs, it is clear he is talking about specific people who sympathized with the perpetrators of the train attacks. But this is still when anti-Muslim action was strong in Gujarat, so the timing, I think rightfully, was seen as insensitive. But whatever happened to that Narendra Modi guy? I mean, I just said he became a PM. Part 4. Modi. Portrait of an Incel. Narendra Modi was born September 17th in 1950 in the city of Vadnagar in the present-day state of Gujarat. His family grew up poor, and he had an interest in theater as a kid, which kind of explains a lot. He discovered RSS and began attending training sessions at the age of 8, which also explains a lot. He did some work with the RSS covertly when it was banned during the emergency, and then he worked as a full campaigner for the RSS most of his adult life. When he was 18, he was arranged to be married to a woman known as Jashabadin, but Modi protested and has been estranged from her since 1968. To this day, they are still legally married, and for the most part, they kind of refuse to acknowledge each other's existence. Which is kind of weird, because he's one of the most powerful people on the planet. She was a teacher for most of her life, but is currently retired and is said to live a modest, simple life. The Indian right see her as an ideal female role model, which really makes me want to vomit, to be honest. But, she didn't ask for any of this, so I hope whatever's best for her, she gets. In 2001, there was a vacancy for the position of Chief Minister of Gujarat, basically the equivalent to a governor of a state. Modi, in his involvements with the BJP and the RSS, He had butt heads with the old chief minister of Gujarat and had never held elected office before. But due to his status as a longtime party operative, Vajpayee decided to appoint him the chief minister of Gujarat. And he would serve in this position until about 2014 when he became prime minister. His tenure was controversial for a lot of reasons, including the aforementioned Gujarati riots, to the point where he was banned from entering the United States from his role in the event, a ban that was only lifted once he got elected prime minister of the country. Which I feel like, yeah, okay, that's one way to get your visa approved. In 2002, there was a special election in all of Gujarat after the assembly had dissolved, and the BJP won a large majority. The BJP and Modi used a lot of anti-Muslim dog whistling during the campaign, which probably helped them win despite all the negative press from all the crimes against humanity. And Modi became the equivalent of a big security, law and order Republican type that you would see in America. He did make terrorism and security a big part of his campaign. After the 2006 Mumbai train bombing, he became a very prominent anti-terrorist voice. It's important to note Mumbai is not in Gujarat, but it is close enough that his words could ring resonance with some people in the area. But you can't run an entire country on saying fuck the Muslims, so what else did he do? He did govern kind of like an American pro-business conservative. Think a Rick Perry or a Paul Ryan type. Someone who favored privatization of government services and enticing businesses with perks. Lord knows they need more perks when operating in third world countries. During his tenure, Gujarat saw a lot of new infrastructure and employment increases. It had the largest growth of any Indian state at the time. And not to mention, he had finalized a plan to get every village in Gujarat connected to an electrical grid, which is a very ambitious project and something that would help a lot of people. But there are plenty of who think that Modi is given too much credit. They do point out that the growth was likely due to the fact that, countries like India, who may be a bit lower developed, start going off quickly, once the globalization hits in. And some point out that the rate of growth was much stronger in the 90s when the INC had control of the state. But, much like my home state of Texas, you can have a good economy on paper, but still a lot of people living in poverty and discrimination, especially compared to the rest of America. But much like Texas, the politicians in Gujarat looked the right way and prayed the right way, so Modi was still very popular. And because of the example that the state had led, the BJP decided that he would be their candidate for prime minister in the 2014 elections. Part 5, 2014. In 2004, INC Prime Minister Manmohan Singh announced that he would retire after 2 terms as Prime Minister. So the race was an open seat between Modi and the BJP and Rahul Gandhi, the new leader of the INC. As well as, of course, the many parties in their coalition and other parties outside of the coalitions. And this was a pretty wild campaign. Economic growth was slowing at the time, so there were a lot of people looking toward what they saw as Modi's good governance in Gujarat and thinking that could be a model to help the rest of the country get, back on speed. As well as a lot of corruption stories involving the INC that were, very common and alarming to a lot of people. So, that really doesn't help the incumbent party that have served for 10 years. It is worth noting that both parties had released their manifestos pretty late. The INC did it a week before the first voting on April 7th, and the BJP did it on the day itself. Both manifestos had promised a fight against corruption and an increase in investment and development. But again, if the INC have led for 2 terms and people are still kind of suffering, they're not really gonna believe you when they say they really mean it this time. Especially by making a guy like Rahul the face of the party, someone who has been in the very prominent Nehru-Gandhi political family. So the BJP kind of had a head start going in. One of the things that Modi would talk about was promising to build a toilet in every house. And that, obviously gets, a little bit of chuckles in the press. But a lot of the country didn't have access to sanitation. And especially for women, this is a huge issue that affects a lot of people. And that's a very desirable promise. Rahul Gandhi never really talked about issues like this during the campaign, instead focusing on, oh, I don't want to say Blairites, but definitely Clintonian sort of messages of we can keep going forward on track and everything will be okay. Now, of course, would I trust the Indian version of Scott Walker to keep his promise? No, I wouldn't. But yeah, there are a lot of people who prefer a candidate who has the solution wrong than the problem wrong. And okay, to be fair, the Modi government did build a lot of toilets for a lot of people, and that did help people, and that's good, and I'm happy for them. You know, okay, good. The BJP won their election in a landslide. The INC lost so many seats they couldn't even form an official opposition as they didn't have the required 10% of seats in the Lok Sabha. The international media was shocked as the BJP, defied expectations. And because of the way Indian elections are ran, it should note that the BJP got 31% of the vote and just over half the seats. The INC, on the other hand, got 20% of the vote and 8% of the seats. First past the post voting, you can't trust that either. Big Tent, no first past the post. Just don't do it. So they have a new energized majority under a pretty popular leader and a 59-year-old Shehua. I think I meant to wrote Sinai. So it's time to get to work. Part 6. The 16th Lok Sabha. When the 16th Lok Sabha was sworn in as the new government, perhaps the most radical right in the history of India, they got to work fucking shit up. I could talk about the demonetization and how amazingly stupid that was, but that's not really in the theme to this video, so let's talk about mob violence and cows, excuse me. Yeah, a very sort of distinct part of some of the anti-Muslim violence is cow vigilantism. Now, cows are seen as holy in Hinduism. That's something I think your average person on the street could tell you, but it's pretty obvious. So when a religion, Islam, that does not hold cows with a particular veneration or has issues with their consumption, that can be a big source of social strife, or at the very least, a wedge issue that existing social strife can be exploited with. Now, violent clashes have been sort of reported. They've been scarce for a while, but once Modi's government came into power, they really sort of took a spike. There was a report by Human Rights Watch, which, okay, I do have my issues with, but they're a good source most of the time. The reporting seems solid. Between May 2015 and December 2014, 44 people were killed in these vigilante mob-style attacks. Of those 44, 36 were Muslim, and the rest were from Dalit communities. Dalit being pretty much what we know as the untouchables. And there are states in India which do ban the literal slaughter of any cattle. Perhaps not coincidentally, all of these states are sort of in the western part of the country near Pakistan. And for a prime minister whose most well-known aspect is being complicit in some of the anti-Muslim violence that occurred in his home state, as well as stoking the rhetorical flames of violence, yeah, this is not a coincidence. When Modi does things like insist that Hindi be the official language of India, as opposed to English, which is not the most well-spoken, but is sort of most spoken across the country, it's a sign that he views people in the Hindu belt, people who speak Hindi and practice Hinduism, as more important than the rest of India. He doesn't have to pass legislation into law in order to stoke the flames of these violence that affect real people, or even certain ethnic groups that may be Hindu but not necessarily the most well-respected in India. For example, the Tamils, who exist in India and Sri Lanka and were in a civil war in Sri Lanka for a very long time. It gave some of the Tamils reputation for being terrorists, but it is sort of like the British occupation of Ireland. The people backed into a corner and they kind of have nowhere else to go. And again, even if you're a Tamil Hindu, you're still being victimized by this idea that there is one correct way to be Indian. Oh, and also, I just want to point out, there's a war going on? I don't know. Yeah, okay, I was writing this thing, and suddenly I just got a news there was a military skirmish between India and Pakistan. And the Hindu hardliners are cheering on, Indian aggression because, fuck the planet Earth. And it is kind of a shame because there have been a couple good signs that relations might get better. Pakistan had elected a moderate, reform-minded prime minister compared to the conservative party that had preceded him. And Modi himself, went to Pakistan and talked about wanting to improve relations, which is really surprising from a right-wing sort of Hindutva party. But, it happens. On February 14th of this year, an Indian military convoy in Jammu and Kashmir was suicide bombed. 40 Indian military personnel were killed, and the attack was claimed by an organization named Jaish-e-Mohammed, an Islamic militant group active in that area based in Pakistan. 12 days after that, Indian Air Force flew into a Pakistani airspace and had bombed what the Indian claimed was a JEM training camp. And Pakistan said it was nothing, actually. Then Pakistan said that it captured 2 Indian pilots who were shot down over Pakistani airspace, but India said only 1 pilot was lost. And then Pakistan said, "You're right," and they gave back that 1 pilot, and social media kind of went crazy some more. Yeah, it's been a while since those attacks, like my procrastination, but things seem to be calming down a bit, which is good. But man, a lot of people in India are war hungry. Yeah, these Hindutva stans love the idea of going to war with their Muslim neighbors who lived next door to them when their grandparents were alive. Seriously, how does no one remember the tragedy and heartbreak of partition? This just does not make sense to me. Also, in case you might have forget, India and Pakistan are nuclear-armed states. If the US and the Soviets had went to war, it would have been considered the end of humanity. And India and Pakistan may not be that globally hegemonic powers, but it can't be that far off if they ever go into direct war with each other. There's a term political scientists use called the rally around the flag effect, which states that people become more patriotic and less objectionable to authority in times of war or crisis. It's why W had such a crazy high approval rating following 9/11 and other military options in his presidency. And it's why Wag the Dog is such a classic in political comedy to this day. So the timing of this happening right before the election is good to the incumbent party, especially if that party is right-wing and has rhetoric a bit hostile to them. So it would benefit Modi and the BJP if these emotions continue to be strong when it's time to vote. As of now, things are going crazy, but it's the 5th of April when I'm recording this. I'm sure something could happen in the next week once the voting starts. So when one major party is actively complicit in violence against its own people, both rhetorically and literally, how does the opposition respond to something like this? Part 7. Liberals get a liberal. Okay, do you ever see those pro-Donald Trump memes that are like, Don Jr. 2024, and then, 2 terms of Eric, 2 terms of Ivana, 2 terms of Barron, just, wanting a Trump sort of to be the president ad infinitum. There were Obama stickers advertising a similar concept. Yeah, that's basically what the INC is, but, actually. Prominent national figures named Gandhi are about 3 for 3 in getting murked. And the INC does love them, I guess, in a Kennedy-esque way. There is a sort of romanticization to, this tragic figure of these national heroes. Which does raise the question, does India have no other national heroes? I'm sure there must be some people who never wrote letters to Hitler about how cool he was. So the 2 most senior figures in the INC are Sonia Gandhi and her son Rahul. I'm going to go over a bit of family history to explain nepotism in the INC, which might explain why the party is kind of a bit so ineffective at doing stuff. And I just want to clarify this because it confused me for a bit. The current Gandhi family in power is of no relation to Mohandas Gandhi, the possible pedophile. Rather, there was an Indian independence fighter who had his name spelled Gandhi when Romanized, but he had changed the Y to an I to put the spelling in line with Mohandas, which, dude, that's a total cuck move. He married Indira Nehru, the daughter of the first Prime Minister of independent India, which, if there is a second major sort of internationally known figure, it's the first Nehru, and took her name, so Indira Nehru became Indira Gandhi, hence Nehru-Gandhi political family. Indira's oldest son was named Rajiv Gandhi, who had met and fell in love with an Italian woman named Sonia Mino. And despite being disinterested in politics for much of his life, he eventually found himself pushed into it after the death of his brother, and especially the assassination of his mother by 2 of her bodyguards. For those who don't know, her bodyguards were Sikh and happened to be against the Indian Army's campaign against a very controversial Sikh leader. Look, history is hard, okay? I looked this up. It's crazy and very depressing. Rajiv was elected prime minister in the snap elections that followed immediately after the assassination of his mother and, incidentally, the anti-Sikh violence that had followed that. But they had lost power in the next general election that was held in 1989. But in 91, Rajiv himself would follow in his mother's footsteps again by being assassinated by an enemy of the Indian government, this time a member of the Tamil Tigers. Eventually, in 1998, Sonia, again Rajiv's widow, would become president of the INC and serve in that role for the longest that any person would before leaving that role in 2017, when her son Rahul took over. Do you see the nepotism? And although Sonia was a prominent member of the INC for a long time, she was never prime minister. She didn't put herself in that position, even though the INC won 2 elections under her leadership. You know, Americans, we may hate the Bush and the Kennedys for all the, really politician clones that they pop out and they make their way into politics all over the country. But, at least they don't control their entire parties forever. And I don't think I should have to explain why having a party ruled by a political dynasty kind of makes them not really appealing to the sort of revolutionary spirit that had, made them so well known and well beloved by people in the 40s. They've basically turned into Democrat-esque status quo liberals from their roots as literal revolutionaries. And the other party is, a group of severe reactionaries who are much more aggressive with their goals than the INC are with theirs. So you might be thinking, damn, there's really just no hope, is there? That's kind of doomed to either melees or communal violence. There must be a better way. And you may or may not know where I'm going with this, but if you don't, buckle in, comrades. Part 8. We need to talk about Kerala. It's like 80 degrees in here. I'm not wearing this. Kerala is a state in the south of India. It is constantly ranked and considered to be one of the best states in India to live in, both in terms of quality of life and human development index, because they're communists. Okay, that's a bit extreme. Certainly no purist or registered party member would consider Kerala to be communist, but the most popular party in the state is the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Not to be confused with the Communist Party of India, who are more moderate, and in the INC's alliance, there was a big split over that, actually. But, Kerala is still an electoral democracy, and the people, for lots and lots of times, elect the Left Democratic Front, an alliance of very far-left parties, to power. The first chief minister of Kerala was a member of the CPI before the split, a guy named EMS Namboodiripad. He was chief minister from 57 to 59, and from 67 to 69. In 59, there was a backlash against his government, which was one of the first democratically elected communist governments anywhere on Earth, which caused a lot of distress, and so the Prime Minister Nehru eventually had it dismissed. They held elections shortly afterward, and the INC took all the power. I'm sure there's nothing to do with that. They've often suspected the CIA of being involved in this, but there's no evidence that they actually were. But there is plenty of evidence that they did have their eye on it, so who knows, something might have happened. And as for 67 to 69, he took power in an alliance of parties that fell apart after about 2.5 years, but despite not having actual power for very long, he is seen as a very influential political figure in Kerala, and to this day is seen as one of the great leaders of the state, kind of like the way Texans see Sam Houston. One of the big things that the communist movement in Kerala did was the Agrarian Relations Bill, which was passed in 1961. They sought to reform the semi-feudal system of the old British Raj, and although they did seek sort of an incrementalist change, possibly due to the government taking all their power away for being bad, they wanted to put land ownership into private hands rather than the feudal hands that it was currently in. And that's capitalism. That's literally, the communists are trying to do capitalism. But, hey, it was still ambitious, especially compared to what some of the other states were doing, and it helped a lot of people, and it included a lot of protections for tenants that still help to this day. And then there was also administrative reform. The Communist Party of India was a big fan of decentralization, and they wanted to put power in the hands of communities rather than the state of Kerala. This kind of put them at odds with the Chinese Communist Party, who was still following Stalin's direction of very much central planning, which I can sort of go back and forth on that, but I will say that, but I'd rather live in Kerala than that state with the Muslim concentration camps. You know what I mean? Today, the CPIM puts a lot of emphasis on social issues, which is good, as Kerala is a very diverse state. About 26% of the population is Muslim and 19% Christian. And Muslims living in Kerala are generally some of the most safest and prosperous in India. And the party has worked hard to combat sexism as well. They really put an emphasis on women's education and work training, and again, women in Kerala are some of the most educated in the third world. It's gotten to the point where there is a socio-political term called the Kerala model, which seeks to examine why the state does so well compared to the rest of the third world. And there is, granted, a lot of factors behind that. For example, Kerala was kind of a popular place where Christian missionaries could build schools, so, you know, there was, in some case, infrastructure there, although, I don't know, religious education can be kind of, just say my views on that aren't very Mandela-esque. But there is no doubt that the particular brand of left-wing politics they have do play a big part in what helps the people of Kerala succeed and prosper. But, you know, again, the brand can be almost toxic in the rest of the country, so, like, you know, why don't other states elect them to their legislature or even to the Lok Sabha? I guess it's the same reason the left isn't too good at elections. There's just, you know, a lot of forces against it, you know. The media and people in general focus a lot on the BJP and INC alliances, which is fair because, again, there are a lot of parties in India. You know, if you can simplify it to sort of two teams, it just makes it easier for everyone. Because the CPIM split from the CPI over not wanting to be associated with the INC, they do get dismissed as a bit of a fringe part of Indian politics. And granted, they can govern mostly like just particularly bold social democrats, although there are definitely a lot of co-ops in Kerala that you might not be able to find in the rest of the country. And of course, being very proudly communist is just easy to attack in the post-Cold War era. And then there's just, you know, people don't often vote with their heads as much as they do their hearts, you know? The BJP can motivate voters with social divisiveness and appeals to the Hindu identity. The INC can use the image of Gandhi and, you know, the pride and national unity of India to motivate people based on the Indian identity. And the CPIM can't do that terribly well just because, frankly, if you grew up poor, the idea of socialism or anti-capitalist left politics just doesn't connect with you emotionally. And if you're watching this video, you are politically informed, and I just want to point out, most people are normies. Most people do not give a flying fuck about politics. At least in America. In Kerala they do though, which is I think part of the reason why they're doing so good. So most people just aren't interested in politics, and you know, that's kind of just okay to be expected. Have you seen the turnout in Texas mayoral elections? You know, it is the motivatedly minded who decide things, and the left just isn't good at that. It's just kind of one of those things that, you know, you have to deal with. Part 9. What now? So the polls currently show the BJP alliance winning, but also a good chance that there could be a hung parliament, which would require the BJP needing to put more parties into their alliance in order to have a majority of seats in the Lok Sabha. But given the divisiveness of the BJP label in the past 5 years, it's not really clear who else would want to do that. The results won't be announced until after the end of the last voting in May, so we will have some time to find out who wins, and definitely a lot of voting going on until then. And I will just say it is obviously important that people do vote out the BJP. A party that exacerbates religious tensions, does not stand up to exploitative foreign businesses and domestic ones, is bad at enacting their policies in a fair way, is just a bad party and should go away. There are some people who compare Modi to Trump, and, you know, I do think Trump comparisons internationally are an oversimplification, but I do think there is one point to be made there. Trump in 16 and Modi in 14 were talking about issues that really did affect people. They said things like this while the Liberals Party sort of pretended that things were fine and wanted to coast on their previous successes. But, you know, there are too many people hurting who think that's too slow or that won't get them. And, of course, again, in this case, the reactionaries are liars. They're bad at it. But, again, people can be more animated by someone who gets the solutions wrong than the problems wrong. So it's important that the left does take control of this narrative about people's lives who are hurting. Because if we don't, the reactionaries will. And that's my video, everyone. Thank you so much. I really wanted to get it done sooner, but while I was writing/recording this, I got news that I had been accepted into law school, and I kind of went up there. I had to do some things. It's all happening a lot, and I'm feeling very anxious about it, but definitely excited to start soon. So really can't wait for that. I'll try to make it so that the next video, it comes out sooner. It shouldn't take me that long to write it, especially since I've gotten 2 more of these big things out of the way. Definitely follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch if you want to get more updates on what I'm doing. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, because it does help the algorithm kind of get me out there. And I started a Patreon now, which is good. I originally didn't want to do it, but I do know that they're changing them soon, and I kind of want to get grandfathered into the old rules while I'm still able to. So if you want to send a few dollars my way, I am going to law school. I could probably use it. And yeah, hope to be more active on Twitch, and hopefully the next video doesn't take this long to come out. Thank y'all so much, and take care. Have a good rest of y'all days. Despite being initially disinterested in... fuck.